All right, Chapter 1, Exploring Life and Science. In this chapter, we're going to go over the basic characteristics common to all living organisms, and we're going to describe the different levels of the organization of life. So biology in general is just the scientific study of life, and there's a huge amount of diversity among living things, as demonstrated in this figure here. So starting on the left, we have bacteria, which are ubiquitous microscopic organisms with relatively simple structures, but life can also be these paramecium. These are protists. They're also microscopic organisms, but they're much larger, much more complex than bacterium. Now, obviously, organisms are diverse in a multitude of ways, such as the way that they are shaped or structured, or how they function, or how they avoid predation or gather their nutrients. And so one of the ways that we classify or characterize life is the way that they extract nutrients from their environment. So for example, morels, like this one here, are a form of funguses which digest their food externally and then absorb the nutrients once their food source has been broken down. Plants, such as sunflowers, photosynthesize their food by using energy from sunlight. So they don't even digest their food. They actually make their food to extract energy from their environment. Animals like the octopus right here are going to ingest their food from their environment. So they're going to ingest and then digest their food internally. So despite the complexity and diversity, life can be defined by a few common characteristics that are going to be found in all living things. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this chapter, is some of those commonalities between all of those different organisms. So starting off, one of the most common characteristics of life is that life is organized. And there are different levels of biological organization that range from atoms down here all the way up to the biosphere. The cell is going to be the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. So living things can be either unicellular, meaning they're made up of one cell, or multicellular, meaning they're made up of multiple cells. And each level of organization is going to be more complex than the level preceding it. So as biological complexity increases, each new level is going to acquire emergent characteristics or new emergent properties, meaning that each level of increased complexity is going to have new characteristics associated with it. So the different organization levels, we're going to start off with those levels of biological organization. We're going to start off with those atoms. Atoms are going to be joined together to form molecules. Like I said before, the cell is going to be the smallest structural and functional unit of an organism. And some organisms will be single cellular. This is known as unicellular. Some, like humans, are going to be multicellular, meaning they're composed of many different cells. If we have a lot of different cells working together to form a particular function, we're going to call that a tissue. So moving up from there, a bunch of tissues working together to form a common function would be organs. An organ system is going to be a group of organs that are working together for a common purpose. So an organ system would be something like your digestive system. All of the different organs within your digestive system are working together to aid in the process of extracting nutrients from your environment. An organism is going to be a collection of organ systems. A species will be a group of interbreeding organisms. A population is all the members of one species in a particular area. So for example, my home has a human population. That would be all of the humans that are living in my house. Now that's not all of the living things in my house, but a population is going to be the members of one species in a particular area at a particular time. A community would be the interacting populations. So it would be the human population in my house, plus my collection of house plants, plus the ants that we sometimes have in the summer, the lone spider that is catching flies in the corner of my house. All of those different species are going to be part of the community of my home. An ecosystem would be the community of populations interacting with the physical environment. So in this case, the ecosystem would be my physical house and all the living organisms that are found therein. A biosphere is going to be all of the Earth's ecosystems combined. So that's the first characteristic of life. The second characteristic of life is that all life requires materials in energy. Living organisms require energy to maintain their organization and carry out life's activities. And energy is going to be the capacity to do work. Energy is going to be obtained from the organism's external environment. So organisms are not able to produce their own energy. They're going to have to get it from their environment, either from the food they eat, or in the case of a photosynthesizing plant, they're going to be extracting that energy from the sunlight. Sunlight is going to be the ultimate source of energy for life on Earth. Solar energy is going to be stored as chemical energy by organisms like plants and algae that can undergo photosynthesis. This energy can be taken up by organisms that do not photosynthesize but consume the organisms that do. In other words, I can't make my own energy. I can't make my own glucose. I can't make my own chemical energy because I can't photosynthesize. But I can eat plants that do photosynthesize and obtain energy and nutrients from those organisms. So we're going to have to eat that. So energy is the capacity to do work. Humans are going to acquire materials and energy by eating. Food provides us with nutrients, which are going to be those used for building blocks and energy, meaning that we're going to use those nutrients to not only provide us with energy, but also provide us with the building blocks we need to build up our bodies and maintain homeostasis. So moving on, or to kind of further talk about energy, life requiring materials and energy, we're going to use a term known as metabolism. We're going to talk about this quite extensively later on. But metabolism is going to be the sum total of all the chemical reactions that occur within our cells. And as we stated before, the ultimate source of life for life on Earth is going to be the sun. Photosynthesis is going to be used by plants and algae and some bacteria. This is how we are able to harvest energy from the sun, convert it into chemical energy. This chemical energy is going to be used to produce sugars, which will serve as the basis for food, for the food chain for not only those plants, but for all of the other organisms. The third characteristic of life that we're going to discuss is how organisms maintain homeostasis. All living things have to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is just the term that we use to define the relatively stable and self-maintaining internal environment of an organism. Life can be pretty picky. Most living things have a very rigid set of conditions under which they can thrive. Since the outward environment can be so temperamental, it's essential that we have some self-regulating methods by which we can maintain a constant internal environment. So, for example, we have a very specific range of temperatures under which we are comfortable. When our external temperature exceeds those parameters, we can do a couple of things to help maintain our internal environment, like shivering when we get too cold or sweating when we get too warm. We also have mechanisms for maintaining or for buffering the pH of our blood. So it's very important that we help maintain a specific pH, a specific acidic basic balance inside of our bodies. And we do this by using buffering systems, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we have I just want to point out that we have several different mechanisms for maintaining that constant internal environment. So, because we need to maintain homeostasis, sort of an outgrowth of that is that living organisms must also be able to respond. Homeostasis would not be possible if we were not able to respond to our environments. We have to be able to interact with our environment and respond to changes. So, for example, we have to be able to sense and pursue nutrients or avoid dangers or harmful substances. And the ability to respond often produces movement. And I know we typically think about movement in animals, but less so with plants, funguses, and other organisms. But for example, leaves will actually turn towards sunlight. Animals avoid predators. This response ensures the survival of the organisms. We need to be able to pursue nutrients and avoid dangers. The response of an organism to its environment is going to be classified as its behaviors. And organisms will display a huge variety of behaviors in order to maintain homeostasis, search and compete for energy, nutrients, shelter, and mates. There's going to be several different stimuli that we're going to discuss in this course. We'll talk about external stimuli, so that's sort of outward things that you're responding to, outward, indicators in your environment, like removing your hand from a hot stove, internal stimuli, adjustments in blood pressure in response to values outside of normal. So otherwise, your body has mechanisms to adjust to internal stimulus. So if your blood pressure gets too high, we can bring it down. If your blood pressure gets too low, we can raise it up. Living, or the characteristics of life continue. So living organisms can also reproduce and grow or develop. So living things must have the ability to grow and reproduce or generate new individuals that can carry on some of their genetic material. Some organisms, specifically unicellular organisms, can reproduce asexually by cloning themselves, just simply making a copy of all of their genetic information and splitting themselves in half. But other organisms reproduce by combining genetic material with another individual to reproduce. So I want you to take just a moment and think about that. Like, what benefit would that provide? Why would some organisms want to reproduce by simply cloning themselves? What benefit would that be? Why would some organisms have developed that methodology? And then also think about, why have some organisms evolved to require genetic variability, to require genetic information from both themselves and another individual in order to produce the next generation? So think about that. Take a few minutes, pause the video, and just kind of try and work through that. What sort of benefits do each reproductive strategies provide? So some of the terms that you're going to want to know from this section would be growth. Growth is just simply the increase in size and number of cells. Development would be the changes that occur from fertilization until death. So it's sort of the not just the growth, not just the getting bigger, but how you're going to develop and change. And those changes occur during childhood, adolescence, adulthood, repair after an injury. All of those are going to be part of development. So in addition to responding to the environment, organisms are also going to evolve and adapt over time. So this is what we refer to as having an evolutionary history. Members of an organism population that have beneficial traits are going to survive and have more reproductive success than the members of a population who do not. And the process by which a population changes over time because of some favorable traits being passed on while other unfavorable traits are not being passed on is called natural selection. These traits are called adaptive traits because they allow the organism to survive and thrive and reproduce in its natural environment. So just for example, the tropical forest has a hot, rainy summers and warm, wet winters. In other words, it has a very, very long, almost near constant growing season. And because of the long growing season, there's going to be a ton of vegetation in the rainforest. So there's lots and lots of growth, lots and lots of vegetation, but because of all of the vegetation, there's going to be intense competition for sunlight. Keeping in mind that all of those plants and vegetation require sunlight in order to photosynthesize and produce their food. So because the competition for sunlight is so fierce, the trees are going to be able to, going to grow very quickly, or the trees that are able to grow very quickly are going to do well. So not only do the trees need to grow very quickly, they need to grow very tall because they need to get taller than all the other trees surrounding them so that way they can absorb the most sunlight. So very tall vegetation that grows very well is going to do very well. Short vegetation does not. You're not going to see a whole lot of grasses and shrubs in the rainforest. So because the producer base is so tall, high up in the canopy, all of the herbivores that thrive on vegetation must live there as well, or at least have very quick access to it. So we're going to see either a lot of flying or tree-based herbivores. Because that's where all of the herbivores are, that's where all of the prey population is. We're going to see that the predators are also going to be flying or tree-based carnivores. All of this is going to come back to the climate and evolving to be best adapted to that environment. All right, and that's it for this section. I'll see you guys for section 1.2.